Leitura do livro Henry Kissinger on China, New York Times bestseller. Então, esse livro está em inglês, que é a língua original dele. Vamos lá. Um comentário que tem aqui, deixa-me ver. Fascinating. No living in America has played a more important role than Henry Kissinger, the former National Security Advisor and Secretary of State, in bringing about the historic rapprochement between the United States and China. Kissinger draws deep insights into China's traumatic encounter with much stronger Western powers. San Francisco Chronicle. Financial Times. No one can lay claim to so much influence on the shaping of foreign policy over the past 50 years as Henry Kissinger. And another one. From the eminent elder statesman and astute appraisal of Chinese diplomacy from ancient times to the fraught present strategic trust with the United States, former Secretary of State Kissinger brings his considerable scholarly knowledge and professional expertise to this chronicle on this complicated evolution and precarious future of China's diplomacy with the West. Sage words and critical perspective lent by a significant participant in historical events. Kirkus Reviews. Henry Kissinger served in the U.S. Army during the Second World War and subsequently held teaching posts in history and government at Harvard University for 20 years. He served as National Security Advisor and Secretary of State under Richard Nixon and Gerald Ford, and advised many other American presidents on foreign policy. He received the 1973 Nobel Peace Prize, the President's Medal of Freedom, and the Medal of Liberty, among the other awards. He was the author of numerous books and articles on foreign policy and diplomacy, including most recently Leadership on China and World Order. He served as chairman of Kissinger Associates Incorporation, an international consulting firm, and he died in 2023. So while the author has made every effort to provide accurate telephone numbers, internet addresses, and other contact information at the time of publication, neither the publisher nor the author assumes any responsibility for errors or for changes that occur after publication. He dedicates the book to Annette and Oscar de la Renta. Let's go. Preface. 40 years ago, almost to the day, President Richard Nixon did me the honor of sending me to Beijing to re-establish contact with the countries central to the history of Asia, with which America had had no high-level contact for over 20 years. The American motive for such opening was to put before our people a vision of peace transcending the travail of the Vietnam War and the ominous vistas of the Cold War. China, though technically an ally of the Soviet Union, was in quest of maneuvering room to resist a threatened attack from Moscow. In the interval, I have been to China more than 50 times. Like many visitors over the centuries, I have come to admire the Chinese people, their endurance, their subtlety, their family sense, and the culture they represent. At the same time, all my life I have reflected on the building of peace, largely from an American perspective. I have had the good luck of being able to pursue these two strands of thinking simultaneously as a senior official, as a carrier of messages, and as a scholar. This book is an effort based in part of conversation with Chinese leaders to explain the conceptual way the Chinese think about problems of peace and war and international order, and its relationship to the more pragmatic case-by-case American approach. Different stories and cultures produce occasionally divergent conclusions. I do not always agree with the Chinese perspective, nor will every reader. But it is necessary to understand it, since China will play such a big role in the world that is emerging in the 21st century. Since my first visit, China has become an economic superpower and a major factor in shaping the global political order. The United States has prevailed in the Cold War. The relationship between China and the United States has become a central element in the quest for world peace and global well-being. 8 American presidents and 4 generations of Chinese leaders have managed this delicate relationship in an astonishingly consistent manner. Considering the difference in its starting point, both sides have refused to permit historical legacies of different conceptions of domestic order to interrupt their essentially cooperative relationship. It has been a complex journey for both societies. Believe they represent unique values. American exceptionalism is missionary. It holds that the United States has an obligation to spread its values to every part of the world. China's exceptionalist is cultural. China does not proselytize. It does not claim that its contemporary institutions are relevant outside China, but it is the heir of the Middle Kingdom transition, which formerly graded all other states as various levels of tributaries based on their approximation to Chinese cultural and political forms. In other words, a kind of cultural universality. A primary focus of this book is the interaction between Chinese and American leaders since the People's Republic of China was founded in 1949. Both in and out of government, I have kept records of my conversations with 4 generations of Chinese leaders and have drawn on them as a primary source in writing the books. This book could not have been written without our dedicated and able assistance of associates and of friends who permitted me to impose on them for help. Schuyler Schouten was indispensable. He came to my attention 8 years ago when Professor John Gades of Yale recommended him as one of his ablest students. When I started this project, I asked him to take a 2-month leave from this law firm. He did so, and in the process became so involved that he saw the effort through to this end a year later. Schuyler undertook much of this basic research. He helped with the translation of Chinese texts and even more with penetrating the implications of some of the subtler ones. He was indefatigable during the editing and proofreading phase. I have never had a better research associate, and very rarely one as good. It has been by good fortune to have Stephanie Younger-Mote work with me for a decade across the gamut of the activities. I have dedicated on China to Annette and Oscar de la Renta. I started the book in their home in Punta Cana and finished it there. Their hospitality has been only one facet of a friendship that has added joy and depth to my life. These words were written in 2011. Note on Chinese spellings. This book makes frequent references to Chinese names and terms. Well-known alternative spellings exist for many Chinese words based on 2 particularly widespread methods of transliterating Chinese characters into the Roman alphabet, the Wade-Giddens method. Prevalent through much of the world until 1980s, and the pinyin method, adopted officially in the People's Republics of China in 1979 and increasingly common in Western and other Asian publications thereafter. For the most part, this book employs pinyin spellings. For example, the pinyin spelling of Deng Xiaoping is used rather than Wei Gaile's spelling Deng Xiaoping, where other non-pinyin spellings remain significantly more familiar. They are retained for the reader's convenience. For example, for the name of the ancient military terrorist Sun Tzu, the traditional spelling is used rather than the newer pinyin spelling Sun Tzu. Occasionally, in the interest of achieving considerably throughout the book's text, quoted references of names originally listed in the Wade-Giles format have been rendered in their pinyin spellings. Such changes are further noted in the endnotes. In each case, the underlying Chinese word remains the same. The difference is in this method of rendering this word in the Roman alphabet. Prologue. In October 1962, China's revolutionary leader Mao Zedong summoned his top military and political commanders to meet with him in Beijing, 2,000 miles to the west, in the forbidding and sparsely populated range of the Himalayas. Chinese and Indian troops were locked in a standoff over the two countries' disputed border. The dispute arose over different versions of history. India claimed the frontier demarcated during the British rule. China, the limits of Imperial China. India has deployed the outputs of the edge of its conception of the border, and China had surrounded the Indian positions. Attempts to negotiate territorial settlement has foundered. Mao had decided to break the stalemate. He reached far back into the classical Chinese tradition that he was otherwise in the process of dismantling. China and India. Mao told his commanders had previously fought 1.5 wars. Beijing could draw operational lessons from each. The first war had occurred over 1,300 years ago, during the Tang Dynasty, when China dispatched troops to support an Indian kingdom against a legitimate and aggressive rival. After China's intervention, the two countries had enjoyed centuries of flourishing, vertiginous, and economic exchange. The lessons learned from the ancient campaign, as Mao described it, was that China and India were not doomed to perpetual enmity. They could enjoy a long period of peace again, but to do so, China had to use force to knock India back to the negotiating table. The half war, in Mao's mind, has taken place 700 years later, when the Mongol ruler Timur-Lenk seized Delhi. Mao reasoned that the same political entity, the Sino-Indian War, Timur-Lenk had won a significant victory, but once in India, his army had killed over 100,000 prisoners. This time, Mao enjoined his Chinese forces to be restrained and principled.